Hello, we are here for our next installment of Shoebox Conversations with the talented Eric Sanders. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure.
And also here, Sheli Silverio and Sam as Vollie Osborn. We're really happy to be here talking with you about your practice. I mean, we always love our studio visits when we're able to, see all of the really cool experimentation and play that you're doing with your work. And you have like I feel like, we've talked about this, or my team and I talked about this, how much you love art, in every aspect. So that definitely carries over when we look at your work. So to start, tell us like how you got into art, kind of your history as an artist.
Well, I started painting as a young child. My father was quite a gifted painter, and his paintings were hanging all around our house. And he gave me oil painting lessons at age 6 through 7. And so that's where I learned to like painting. I think love might not be too strong a word. And to this day, when I smell real turpentine, because that's what we used back then, it just transports me back to those days so quickly. And I painted sporadically, but continually up until I graduated college, and kept pushing my technique during that roughly 15 years. And but once I graduated college, then my mind completely turned to earning a living, and I eventually got married and had kids, and so it was just completely off my radar screen in terms of painting until a few years ago. But during that 30 years plus hiatus, I was always had to have some way of being creative, whether it was through architecture or going to museums. We're also, our family was we lived in Princeton, which was kind of halfway in between Philly and New York. So we were hitting all the New York museums and the Philly museums, not constantly, but quite often. And so I always had an appreciation for fine art. It was just part of our familial culture. So so I always had to have some kind of creative outlet, whether it was music, making playlists, or just there's always something that creativity is kind of like a irrepressible kind of driving force within me. And there's a few things that happened within the last 5 years that were the access point for me going back into reconnecting with my painting, which was I started collecting. And in part, collecting kind of was like a good access point because the monetary practical limitations of collecting are that if you want to collect anything pre-1940, you're talking pre-World War II, you're talking millions of dollars, typically. So if you want something that's a bit more affordable, you have to look at contemporary art. And I hadn't looked at contemporary art. I was more interested in all the blue chip guys that you'd see in museums. And the whole time that I was in college, I was going to school in Washington, D.C. And I would go down to the East Wing or the National Gallery and study Monet or Van Gogh or Caravaggio, and I'd come back and I was like, okay, I'm going to make a Caravaggio kind of style painting or Van Gogh type painting. So I got exposed because of my collecting to contemporary art, and so that was my kind of introduction to looking at and starting to understand what was going on in contemporary art. And then a couple years after I got into collecting, my girlfriend, who's we've now been seeing each other for 5 years, gave me a set of paintbrush, three tubes of paint, little tubes of acrylic, blue, white, and black, and one paintbrush, and a little pad of paper. So that was my studio. and that's all it took to get me thinking about going back to painting. But at first I was completely terrified because I thought, oh geez, all of my technique is, I'm sure, long gone, and I don't know if I'll ever get it back. And I just was laboring under the impression that creativity is more a domain of youth and not of somebody in their early 50s. So I thought it was going to be kind of like a fool's errand, but I said, what the heck, I'll just play around and see what happens. And the thing that I was surprised to find was that I kept, when I started painting, I had all this content to pull on that I didn't have when I was young. And so even though I didn't have the tech, and I picked up the technique faster than I thought it would take to regain it. So I started painting pretty good paintings, and so that encouraged me to just keep going further and further. Sorry, that's a very long answer to your question.
No, it's great. It's great. And actually, that's a perfect segue to let me go ahead and share my screen so everybody can start to look at your art. Because this is like part of your studio space where you show a lot of your paintings.
Yeah.
Now, and just so, I mean, everything you're saying, I mean, you could definitely, you know, you're very prolific in, you know, in your work, and it just shows like how invested you are in art, you know, in all aspects.
Yeah.
For sure.
I for better or for worse, that is, that's the way I do things. When I do something, I just throw myself in, you know, really intensively. So a lot of people describe me as being intense when that's the way I do things. So that's how I've been approaching my practice for the last few years.
And, you know, that could actually be the answer to a question I was going to ask about, you know, you ran a business for 30 years.
Yeah.
How, have you noticed how that business has affected your, you know, your art practice?
Definitely, because, well, there was a transitional point where at first I was just painting as a hobby, but a friend of mine talked me into getting into painting as a means to promote my philanthropic interests, which I've been doing for about 15 years. And so when I made the decision to marry my two passions together of art and philanthropy, by way of, well, by the way I was thinking of doing that and have been doing it, is that all the proceeds from all the sales of my work go into my nonprofit foundation, which fund the various philanthropic interests that I have and support. And so when I started building a practice where I was going to be selling work, I realized I had all these business skills that I could bring to growing my practice that kind of gave me an edge over, because everything's some form of competition. It gave me a competitive edge that I understood about strategy and a lot of pieces that, and also my resources were going to be very helpful, kind of, you know, fast track a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish. So that's, I would summarize how business has played a role in my art practice.
Yeah, I've seen you've taken a lot of those skills and put together even a team to help you in your art practice.
Yeah.
Which is really, you know, smart and, you know, the way to go when you're invested in your career in many different ways, monetarily and, you know, mentally even.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
Great.
So I wanted to start off with showing a few of your abstract paintings. You know, you had mentioned that, of course, you loved, you know, Caravaggio, and, you know, all of these figurative painters, which actually we're going to see some of your figurative work in a few minutes, but, you know, a lot like, and not that you started off, but, you know, you had a show, and we're going to show a couple of pictures of that, of all abstract work. So what made you, you know, like go from Caravaggio to this abstract work?
Yeah. It's a similar answer that my answer is similar to the answer they asked David Bowie, why did he become a rock and roll guy? Because he was actually a classically trained saxophone player, but he could also sing and play guitar a little bit, but he wasn't at the same level in that he was with his saxophone playing. But he made the decision to become a rock and roll guy because he thought it was easier to fake. You can fake it. And so I kind of thought, well, there's no technique involved in abstract art. I can fake that better than I can the figurative stuff. And so that'll be like an easier access path to like get some traction. And I was quite surprised at how hard abstract painting is, because there are no guardrails or no rules, but at the same time there definitely is a spectrum from good to bad in abstract art, but it's very difficult to figure out how to accomplish that in abstract. In fact, frankly, I think it's much more difficult than figurative art. So there's a plus and a minus to it. So that's why I made the deliberate decision to begin as an abstract painter.
I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that you started painting with your father around 6. Like, what kind of paintings were you making then?
My first painting was of a castle, and with a dark lit sky and a little spider crawling down from the corner of the castle. I painted pictures of ghosts, a portrait of my mother. And that's about all I can recall. I actually have all of them. I kept every one of them. I have them sitting in a box somewhere in my closet.
Oh, that's fantastic. I definitely want to see that at some point.
I know. I was going to ask if you still had them.
I guess my curiosity is just that I can very much see your kind of love and obsession with art, and the way that you even kept looking. You know, you kept looking at art and up until the point where you wanted to collect art. So I feel like I very much see your history, even when you weren't picking up a paintbrush. Like, I see that mark making of all of those, that visual language that you were just continually recording throughout your whole life. So I was just kind of curious what the beginnings of that were.
Yeah, I began as a figurative painter.
You were saying that there's like really no bounds on the abstract art when you come into it. So what does your process look like for when you're about to start? Like, especially a piece like is here in the photo that's so large.
I don't have a set. It's changed a lot, and there's been several kind of methodologies that I use as kind of starting points. In the beginning, I was very simple, simply just picking a couple of colors that I wanted to work with, and trying to trying to create some kind of layering of these colors on top of each other that was aesthetically appealing. And then I started getting, I was also really, as part of my intense throwing myself into my practice, studying everybody that I could find that was of interest to me aesthetically, whether it was on Instagram or through studio visits on my collecting side, and reading books about the masters, and I just would copy work and then try and jump from copies to doing my own spin on their style, and incorporating what I picked up from doing copies of their work, and seeing if I could implement those elements into my own piece. Nowadays, I have a little bit more sophistication in my style, in my creative starting point, in that I'll tend to think more in terms of series now, of things that can be replicable or connected over, at least several different pieces. And so I'm thinking about ideas of series, and exploring some kind of thing, whether it's shapes or colors or patterns or processes. So I think that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, that was very edifying.
And that also answers a question I was going to ask, kind of, about, especially with abstract, and, you talk about you're inspired by so many artists, and, even in art school, we were taught to copy the masters and copy other artists. And, what did you learn about abstraction, about art making, by doing that?
Well, basically, it might sound like a cop-out, but I learned different things for every single artist that I've copied. I learned I guess the most common lesson I learned was that it was always much more complicated than I thought to replicate their work than it appeared at the start, and to really do it successfully was challenging. There are some people that I found that it was as easy as I thought, or easier, and that would sometimes be a little disappointing to me, and I'd kind of downgrade them in my hierarchy of where I saw how much I love their work. So the ones that I found were much more difficult to do. Rothko is a really good example of it. They look so simple, and my God, they're so difficult. I still can't even figure out how he did that. And I've been thinking about it a lot. So.
It's interesting. There's an abstract artist that I follow that I've always wondered how he did his style. And I'm like, it must be with a squeegee or something. And lately he's been posting, these videos on Instagram where he actually uses a tiny brush and brushes like each little mark. And, it's just, once you really, listen and watch and, and get to know artists, it's, in almost every case, it's so much different and harder than you thought. And I mean, it's amazing that you're learning that by doing, and that's how you build up, that's how you find your voice, through that experimentation and that play.
I was saying to Kristine and Sheli the other day that going through your work, Eric, and the series that you've done, which is nice to hear you say you've been thinking about it in series, I feel like I've learned so much about abstract art. It's like I've gone on that same little journey with you of the people that you've gone back to and the techniques that you've tried and the things that you've been exploring.
Yeah.
Before we move to your show, I also wanted to talk, you don't just paint, physically, I mean, I don't want to say it that way, but you also do digital abstraction. So it's not just with acrylic or oil, but it's digitally. So where did that process come into your timeline? Why did you, was that just another way of creating art? What brought you to the digital realm?
Well, if we reflect upon the fact that I started painting in 1969, 1970, there certainly was no such thing as digital then. So when I came back to painting, it was all practical at first. That I travel a lot, and I was trying to paint, and I was traveling, so I actually brought paint with me on one of my trips and tried to paint in the hotel and got it all over the room, and the housekeeping got kind of mad at me, and I just realized that this isn't sustainable. So I started using a little app on my iPhone to kind of do sketches to map out what like color schemes that I was going to do. And the more I was playing around with it, well, I got my little study done, and it took so much work to get it done because I wasn't very skilled at using that app yet. But when it was done, I was like, well, this is actually a good piece, but I'm also kind of like done with it. Now I don't feel like painting it. So I realized I just kept going and going and going, and the more I got it, the more I got interested in learning about it, and I started taking lessons from people that were really good. And I bought a software that was very sophisticated digital art software that takes years to really learn how to master, and just has so many things you can do with it that are very powerful. And so it was kind of like, one of the advantages, in addition to that, you don't have terpenoids or turpentine and brushes and cleaning and spots on your carpet or on your shoes, or and you can do it sitting in bed, or you can do it in a hotel or in your car or in an airport, is that if you're doing something figurative, it's easier because you can fix things so much, just hit undo if you don't like that particular stroke. Whereas in painting, you're like, well, okay, I'm now committed to that color. And you have to make a decision whether you're going to try to wipe it off or just keep going with it. And that is like a fortuitous mistake that actually could wind up making the piece better. But in digital, you just hit undo and paint it exactly as you were intending to paint it. And you can make nice straight edges, and there's so many things you can do that are really challenging to do in painting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and one of the things though with you and like with you, you have a great way of transitioning from analog to digital with the same work, like creating the same painting, both with oil and acrylic, and then creating it digitally. And we've talked about that as like, in the same way that Monet, used to paint, Rouen Cathedral at different times of day.
Right.
It's, we've loved like looking at your work and seeing your work, the same pieces in different medium and different iterations. Is that, just to hone your skills, or was there, did you have a reason for that?
No, I kind of backed into it in the sense that a lot of times I would treat my digital things as studies, or sometimes I was just making them, and then I was in my studio looking for an idea of something to paint, and I just got me flipping through my digital images for something to inspire me, and I'd see something, and I'd say, this is a really strong piece. Why don't I translate this into painting? Because I've already done all the work, and I've already know that this is an accessible piece, so I don't have to do all that figuring out. It's a faster path to having a tangible thing that a unique piece of art that I could put out there in the world, and I've already figured out all the elements of it. But sort of like when you go to do a master copy, and you figure out it's harder than you thought. It happens a lot that the paintings are just not the same as the digital piece. Sometimes they're better, and sometimes they're not. But they're quite often different. Like you showed a piece before that was the painting version, which this is one that first or second version of that, and that was the fifth version of that painting. As when I finally translated it from digital to paint.
Yeah, we love seeing those, and I think we've talked about it before. Do you keep each version, or do you paint over it, or?
Each version of.
Like you said, it was the 5th version. Have you kept the other 4? Or,
yeah, they're digital.
Or oh yeah, yeah.
Digital, but in terms of I paint over a lot of paintings. It's kind of a relentless. It's either a form of pursuit of perfection or insecurity. So there's quite often 2, 3, or 4 paintings underneath the painting that you're looking at. I've started, I have an archive now which has 500 pieces in it in 3 years. And so what I've started doing is photographing each painting as I finish it, so that if it eventually goes on to the scrap heap effectively by being painted over, at least I have a record of what was there underneath before it gets buried like one of the cities of Troy.
Yeah, you never know where those paintings will come back, how they'll come back.
Well, I'll save the spectral photography guys some work figuring out what's under there.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to just show a couple of pictures of a solo show that you had a couple of years ago. How did the show come about, and how did you feel about seeing all your work in one place like this?
It was an emotional and very fulfilling experience because I had an epiphany that your work as a body of work is much more powerful than any particular piece. At least that was my perception of it. And I also took away from it that paintings, I guess it's kind of like a plant. If you give them sunshine and water and you treat them and fertilizer, you have a very different plant than if you don't give them things. And if you give paintings the right space and the right lighting and the right framing and the right curation with other pieces, it's so much more powerful than one individual piece without all that care and feeding, so to speak.
And you definitely can see that, in these photos of the exhibition. Your work just flows so well, so beautifully together.
Thank you.
And I know you're working on a catalog from this show that is due to come out anytime.
Yeah, it's at the printer. I'm just waiting for them to show up.
Oh, wonderful. With an essay from Shana E. Stambrod and Gary Brewer?
Yeah, they both wrote. I tried to kind of give it the same level of care and attention that I gave this show. So I hired some, what I think are top-notch people to handle each part of it. The guy who did the catalog and designed the layout and everything was also, I think, at the top of his craft. So I'm very pleased with how the catalog came out.
Oh, wonderful. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely a beautiful show. And then, we're moving to your, more of your figurative work. And I wanted to show especially like the portrait on the left, because we're going to be showing more portraits that you're doing in your printmaking. And I found this in our, in our images. And I thought it was, it's really, I mean, of course, artists create self-portraits all the time. Right. But, no, I love this piece, this digital work, and then we'll see where that goes. But was there something, was it just like a switch, I'm ready to do more figurative now? What made you transition from the abstract to the figurative?
Well, to be honest, I need to reflect, I need to recall a bit, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of what I was doing in the beginning on digital was figurative. and I remember one of the very early, I did 2 master copies, which were really, really difficult. I did Picasso's Le Rêve, and I did Salvador Dali's Atavistic Ruins After the Rains. So even though I didn't have the courage to paint figuratively, I definitely was brave enough to take on figurative things in the digital format, because it doesn't require the same level of technique that it requires in painting.
Definitely. And in fact, I think, oh yes, the next piece, I wanted to show these next to each other. Tell us about these pieces.
Well, the one on the right, at least my right, is the in-process version of what the one on the left wound up being the completion of it. And this came out of a painting class that I've been taking for well over a year now with a very good teacher that I met through Otis College of School of Arts. And the assignment was to take a palette of a master painting, which in this case I used Picasso's Portrait of Casahemus, and then inject that palette into a black and white photo. And she gave us like 25 different photos you could pick from to transpose that palette onto. So this is one of those exercises for that class.
I thought when I saw I think you had sent us both of the images, and I was just struck. I mean, both pieces are strong, you know, in the way that, you know, that you're applying the paint. And even, you know, the one on, I guess, my right, it's, you know, conceptually psychological in just the way that the face is unfinished. So whether it was in process or not, I feel like it's a finished piece. I mean, you know, there is something very psychological about it. So maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I'm very, for me, at this stage of my development in terms of technique, if I could just hit one part of a painting that I'm really happy with, then I feel like it's a successful piece. So his hand that's in the lower and center of the paint part I was really, really happy with how that little part of the painting came out. His face gives me nightmares because it's all disjointed, but
you know, normally hands are the hardest part. So,
yeah,
you know, you got that down.
Yeah.
I think we already learned that Eric likes a challenge, so.
Yes.
Yeah, this was definitely running a marathon in terms of difficulty for me.
And then I wanted to show these of Anna, you know, in your different iterations. I mean, again, more experimentation, you know, and like Sheli said, you know, more of a challenge. Tell us about these mediums that you're using.
Well, the centerpiece is where I'm taking the kind of thing that I've been learning in my painting class about putting palettes into paintings. So I had a photograph of Anna. And I photographed her more as like as a way of teasing her because she was sleeping while we were driving in the car. And so we have this little game where we take pictures of each other and then send it to the other person. So when you wake up and you look at yourself and you see yourself sleeping. So it's like a very kind of affectionate language between us that's subtly being communicated in that painting. And I was imposing a palette from a master copy into that one. And the ones on either side are prints. The one on the left is a very kind of primitive, juvenile effort to, but to learn a new process of printing, which is called Monotype Printing. And the one on the right is an entirely different methodology of printing, which is called Monotype Printing. Because guys like Rauschenberg and Andy Warhol, the way they used silkscreen or printed images in their work is very, very appealing to me. And so I'm starting to feel like I've got enough technique to start to superimpose printed images into my paintings.
Yes, I was just thinking that's like your obvious next step.
Yeah. So I needed to walk before I started to jog. I'm not even pretending to be running yet. And these four are all printed images as well. And these are monotype prints. Monotype means that you only get one image of one printed image. So it's a lot like a painting because it's a unique image. It's not where you have a plate and you can print 1,000 of them, and it might be a minuscule difference in terms of like how the ink came off the plate and touched the paper. But these are, these are all unique pieces, even though they were printed, and they're using different styles of monotype printing.
I'm loving where you're going with these, and I can't wait to see more.
Yeah, it's fun. I have a great teacher. Her name is Camilla Taylor.
Yeah.
She's great to work with.
She's amazing. Yeah, you're in good hands for sure.
Definitely.
And then I think these may be the last two pieces. I wanted to get back to painting for a sec because the one on the right we had just talked about in our, our last meeting, and I'm showing the cutoff version. Tell us, what you did here, what happened, or what you want to happen, or what may not happen after our conversation.
Well, the funny thing is that every single person, so we're focusing on the one on the right with the curly Q in it, that's looked at it in the cropped versus the entire version, because this is a little over 50% of the entire painting, which is actually close. It's like 10.5 feet wide and 7.5 feet high, because it's unstretched. So I had to leave a few inches that could be trimmed off when you put the stretcher bars on it. Everyone likes the entire piece better than the cropped piece. So it's pretty much a unanimous verdict that it's going to be the entire piece.
Yay!
I believe Joshua Elias.
Yeah.
And he said this exact same thing. Don't cut that. We just had lunch yesterday, and he was looking at it. He was like, "Don't do that."
Oh, good.
So,
Of course, the one on the left, we love this because I wanted to show these at the end to show, we've kind of gone through this timeline of, you've been learning so much and experimenting, and you can see your voice coming through. And the one on the left, you are marrying abstraction with figurative.
Yeah.
And, we were so excited when we saw this.
Oh, good. Yeah, to me, because I guess I'm taking a page out of what I've learned from my collecting side, is that the pieces, the guys that I want to collect are figuring out ways to combine things in new ways. That even though I love a Renoir or a Monet painting, people are taking different kinds of styles of art and combining together in new ways is more interesting than doing the best for a really good version of something that's been done for the last couple thousand years. So so I'm trying to take my printing skills and merge them into painting, and take my figurative stuff and merge it in abstract, and hopefully come up with more unique and kind of groundbreaking, fresh takes on creating images.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Awesome. Well, it was so great to look at your work. I'm going to stop sharing here and go back to us. You know, thank you so much. One last question. How as an artist, how has COVID been treating you as far as your creativity, as far as your working? You know, have you been working more, less? You know, how have you been dealing with it?
I've been working more because I can't travel, and I used to travel 4 months a year, and travel, even though I love it, it really narrowed down what I could do, and I'm a bit less interested in doing digital work now than I am in doing more tactile, hands-on stuff like painting and printing. I can't travel, so there's 4 months where now I have studio time where I didn't before, and just I guess it just kind of like clears out all the kind of distractions that used to keep me from getting down in my studio and having the amount of time that I'd like to have down there. And strangely, it's really helped my learning, because online lessons are so much more convenient. You don't have to travel half an hour there or an hour there and an hour back and try to carry wet canvases or clothes with paint all over it, and, you know, get in your car. So I take more classes now just because they're so much more convenient than I used to.
Yeah, that, you know, Zoom has made life so much better, as we can see here.
Yeah,
sure.
It's definitely a plus and a minus to Zoom, but the plus of it has been, and I was shocked. I just took a little tester class because I was so convinced that I was going to be, you know, just a disaster. But I didn't have any other choice, so I'll give it a shot. And I was really shocked that it works, because I kind of realized that, you know, them standing by while you're painting and occasionally stopping in is not very helpful. What's more, the real value is the ideas they're giving you, and you take those, and in the class that I'm in, they give them to you in a tutorial. So it's not even part of the class. You watch those, and then you paint on your own time. So you can paint for 20 hours, and then you have that work then to be shown at the class and get critiqued on. So it's just such a more efficient way of educating.
Definitely. And one more quick question that I thought of. Is there a medium or a style that you haven't tried yet that, you know, is on your mind that you want to experiment with?
There always is. There's somebody lurking in there that I've got, you know, standing in line, just waiting for the right time, or to be able to find the materials, or figuring out the idea that I could use for that style. But I can't. If I have this huge folder called painting ideas, if I could zoom through that, I find it. But I have them. I just can't think of it right now.
I have that in my head and on my computer, so I get it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. It's been wonderful talking to you and seeing your art. And every time we talk, I learn something new about you. And I love your work even more. So, you know, really a pleasure.
Thank you all very much.
And we will see you soon. So
Okay.
have a great day. Thank you.
You too, guys.